more love, more joy, everything.
It's inspired young people.
Inspiration comes from within you. When you clear out the garbage that's in your mind, you then create space for something better, more beautiful to come in.
Let's have life and have it more abundantly.
I say yes.
It's like taking a workshop. I get to be in my pajamas.
We have a very active imagination, which is why it's important to learn how to harness it and then point it in the direction you want to go.
I listen to your show every day.
It's time now for Living Your Inspired Life with Susan Burrell. Susan is no-nonsense, inspirational, motivational, and fun.
This is positive talk radio.
Practical wisdom for everyday life.
It's a gift you give yourself.
Now, here's Susan.
And welcome to Living Your Inspired Life. I'm Susan Burrell, and you are listening to News Talk 1590 KVTA. And on Living Your Inspired Life, we encourage people to tune in and tune up and develop your power perspective. And we have an eclectic group of guests that come on the show all the time. And if you've missed any of our shows, you can go to the website, livingyourinspiredlife.org, and get current with whatever it is we're having the conversation about. So today I am very, very, very happy to have my guest who has written several books, but he's also a Buddhist priest. He teaches meditation, but he's also lived in the real world as a CEO of a company, and he's written a book called Aging as a Spiritual Practice. I want to welcome to the show Louis Richmond. Thank you, Louis, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So I was attracted to your book briefly because I'm in the sandwich generation, what I call the sandwich. I'm the gooey stuff between the two sides. I have a 20-year-old son who's, left home, and so I've got the empty nest. And then I have my parents who are turning 80 this year, and the aging process is speeding up. So your book, Aging as a Spiritual Practice, totally attracted me.
Good.
And the reason also why, because I've been reading it, because you talk about this idea of the horizontal and vertical timeline. So can we start with that?
Certainly.
So tell everybody because to me what I think of when I hear horizontal timeline is, it's just the past, present, the future. It's how our life ticks from the time we're born until we die. But there's a little bit more to this horizontal timeline. Yes?
Well, yes, it's something we all have. It's something we all do. It's our story, really. And we adjust it every day. It's part of what we do, partly consciously, mostly unconsciously. But we have an idea of ourselves as being born sometime, which we don't remember, being a child, which we dimly remember, being young, which we pretty much remember, and then coming up to the age we are. That's our personal history, our memories, our feelings, the highlights of our life, the signposts that demarcate the major events like graduating from high school or college, or your first job, or your wedding, or your big promotion. And then you're here somewhere, as you say, in the middle. And these days, the middle is a lot older than it used to be, but we're in the middle. And then somewhere out there in an imagined future is the end. That's how we usually think of our life and who we are. And it's how we usually think of what aging is that process that we're moving along in some kind of game board of life. And that's the usual way we think of it. But there is another way to think of it, which I call vertical time, which it sounds like you may have read about. And I'm happy to describe that, too. But I just wanted to pause and see if I'd left anything out or anything you wanted to comment about the horizontal time.
No, I think that's a good descriptor, and basically that it is our story, and it tends to be very linear, and with like you said, with those demarcation points, those seem to be the places where we go. Like in my mind, I go, oh, there's the chapter of my life that began, and then there's the part of it where it ended, and now here's the new chapter, and it is a very linear mindset, and as human beings, that's how we operate. We seem to operate more on the earth plane, the material world, in a linear fashion.
Well, that's one way that we operate, and we need to operate that way. We need to know what's happening tomorrow. We have our calendars on our phones now, or wherever we have them. But let's talk a bit just about the emotional side of that line. In the negative sense, we look back and we have an increasing number of regrets.
Oh,
Things
boy.
that didn't go well, things that we wish had gone differently, and
Yep.
the older you get, the more of them you have. And as we get to middle age and beyond, those regrets turn into losses, things that we've lost, our youth, for example, our opportunities for new careers, various things. And of course, at some point we start to literally lose people, lose friends, lose loved ones. And the future, the emotional negativity of the future is worry and fear. What's going to happen? What's going to become of me? What's next? And so, of course, there's a positive side to all of that. We remember some things with great joy. We anticipate things that are going to be happening with great anticipation. But there's a swirl of emotional energy, positive and negative, around that. Now, since I'm a meditation teacher and meditation has been my life and it's what I've cultivated, I have in my own experience and in what I share with people when I teach of another kind of time altogether, another kind of experience. I call it vertical time because particularly when you sit up straight in a chair or on a cushion, you are vertical and you are breathing in this moment. Not some moment in the past or some moment in the future, but right now. And right now is always right now. It doesn't go anywhere. And you actually, when you meditate and feel yourself from the inside, you feel your breath rise and fall in what I like to call the eternal present. And that is like the vertical plane that intersects the horizontal of our life right in the center of ourselves, in our heart, really. And to bring that vertical dimension in to our awareness and to our experience is greatly liberating, and particularly as we face the exigencies of growing older. And in your case, as you mentioned, you have aging parents, and so you may not be in the stage of the end of life, but they are, and so you're in the midst of that experience. Bringing the vertical in, you know, we have so many expressions in the language that recognize this. Just the expression, take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath is to, for a moment anyway, rest in the vertical right now, not what did happen, not what's going to happen, but what is happening. And what is happening, in other words, every moment of your life has both the horizontal and the vertical dimension in it. It's multidimensional. It's not one-dimensional. And, you know, when I'm speaking to religious audiences or more spiritually oriented audiences, I will even speak explicitly about the divine quality of the breath and of the vertical and of the eternal quality that really doesn't age in the same way at all as this horizontal dimension. So that's really the centerpiece. I'm glad that you started with it because it's really the centerpiece of my whole philosophy around aging. I don't try to sugar the cookie. I don't come out as a Pollyanna and say everything will be fine, don't worry, aging's great. It's not true. Believe me, I get plenty of fan mail saying, you know what, you're right, aging, I hate aging, you know. And I even have a chapter in my book called I Hate Growing Old. So
Yes.
I've got to be realistic about that, otherwise I won't have any credibility.
Yeah,
there are bad things, but what about the gifts? What about the joy? That's the balance that I try to teach.
Well, and I love your descriptor of the vertical because, and I meditate, but what I find is oftentimes when I in my meditations, it usually is me just doing a mental wrestling match with my thoughts and my brain, you know, and occasionally I drop into that vertical breath that you're talking about. And when I do, it feels like everything within me becomes like aligned and attuned. And I don't know if it's what you were just saying about just being present with what is, but it always, when I can finally drop into that place, it just feels like, it's almost like my spine just gets straighter, you know? Everything just is better.
Well, my comment about that experience, which is very common in meditation, is that's what's actually real. That's what's actually real. The past is a memory. The future is something imagined. They're real in a sense, but think about it for a minute. Actually, the only reality of the past and the future is right now anyway, because you're always just here. And so that sense of dropping into the real, oh, I'm actually just here right now. This is me. This is my opportunity. This is my next step. That's the dignity and the preciousness of actually being completely real.
Oh my God, I love that you use those two words together, the dignity and the preciousness. That's, yeah. And also, Louis, the thing about, well, okay, so here's my question. As you're describing meditation and being in this moment and being in that dignity and being in that precious moment, in that awareness. Now, in the Western mind, and you haven't just been in a cave meditating your entire life. You've also been out in the real world working a business and having a life and working through major life issues. So I would love you to just speak a moment to those of us that really operate from the Western mind of checking our calendar and checking our cell phone every 5 minutes in case that person texts us about whatever it is, or the next meeting or the next soccer game. So many people operate on that fast track in this country. How can we access that place of vertical alignment without having to do a meditative practice every day? Is there a way to do it?
I do those things too. I'm a busy person, and even though I'm semi-retired from my software business, I still manage it. I still have to check my emails, my text, talk to my programmers. I'm something of a smartphone junkie. I'm following politics regularly. I do all those things. I'm no different than anybody else. I'm very active. I would say the answer to the question is you can't rest in that precious and dignified space all the time. You have to make time for it when you can. And I'm not saying that everyone out there listening has to suddenly become a diligent meditator every day. But you mentioned that you meditate, so I'll ask you back, how do you find the time, and when do you find the time to do it? How do you do it? Because it's simply a matter of, as frequently as you can, making space to turn away from and turn off all the accoutrements of a busy life, and there are more and more of them. We keep inventing them.
Right.
So that we can return to that, I would call that a primal space that human beings have experienced for a million years, as long as we've been here. That space is always there. Walk out into a park, walk to the beach. You're standing in the same space as our ancestors. So it's readily accessible. But how do you find the time, the motivation, and the necessity to do it? That's the challenge.
Yeah, one of the things that I do, because I'm a creature of habit, Louis, so like if I know I have to be at the gym at 9 o'clock, I show up at 9 o'clock. And it's the same with my meditation practice. I have to sit at a certain time every day. Otherwise, the day goes by and I've forgotten. And so when I'm talking to students or clients, that's what I encourage, is to start and make it a routine at a particular time of day so that you can really begin to embody the practice and enjoy it. And then it becomes something that you want to do, not that you have to do.
Well, I think that's right. And for those folks out there that seem unable to part with their smartphone even for an instant, there are apps on your smartphone to help you meditate.
I have one. I do have one.
And I have one too, and they have beautiful bells, and they can recreate that space. So we have this wonderful ability to meld, you might say, the ancient experience of being human with the very modern technological experience. But I think you're absolutely right. First of all, there has to be an appreciation. Preciousness means you experience it as precious. Oh, this is something, this is even more precious than being in shape. Being in shape is good, particularly as you get older. I have a Twitter account, and I'm feeding every day health news. That's one of the reasons I surf the web.
Oh,
and
I see.
Just for the benefit of your listeners, physical exercise over and over and over is the most important thing as you get older.
Well, and one of the things you talked about in your book is that component of that active health and being out in nature, which is something I do. You know, I find also if I'm having a really, really busy day, and I know that I have to combine my meditation practice with my exercise practice, I go for a walk outside in nature, and I make that my meditation, and I breathe, and I just observe as much as I can to be mindful of where I am in the moment as I'm walking outside in nature. And that then so it's a combo pack.
Well, that's right. And, going back to my earlier discussion about vertical time and the feeling of that, nature is a direct experience of vertical time, actually.
Oh, yeah.
I don't say that in my book, but it just occurred to me when you said that.
Yeah, that makes
sense.
sense.
That is the feeling that we're talking about.
Uh-huh.
And that's why people yearn for nature. They've done research that even if you have a poster of nature in your office, it lowers your blood pressure and increases your health. This is a study that's come from England. That's how attuned our psyche is to even the color green.
Right.
We have in our DNA responses. This is our home environment. This is our home world, and just to go into nature, just to get outside, just to breathe fresh air. All of these things are precious, and fresh air in some parts of the world, like China, is getting to be a rare commodity. So we have to enjoy it when it comes.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, that part. But it's true. So many of us spend time in boxes now. Often it's boxes without windows where it is our work environment, or cubicles. It's astounding. And so getting outside on your work break or your lunch hour just to breathe some fresh air and look at a green something, a tree or a plant, is hugely sourcing to your mental, emotional, and physical health.
It is. And again, going back to the central topic of growing older and aging, there's a tremendous amount of research going on now about aging, about healthy aging, about aging well, beginning to be some research on the spiritual aspects of aging. So in that sense, my book was the kind of, first out of the chute in terms of putting that on the map, but that's beginning to be studied too.
Right.
And all of the things that you mentioned have actually solid research behind them. Particularly, they research people who really are older, who live in assisted living or senior living facilities, like many of the parents of your listeners, or maybe your listeners yourselves. And all of these things are being shown to help greatly in cognitive functioning, in well-being, in a sense of happiness, in combating depression and grief. All of these things help. So I draw a circle around all of them and say these are all part of the spiritual aspect of life. I have a very broad definition of what I mean by spiritual.
I would tend to agree with you, Louis. Spiritual encompasses every aspect of life, and oftentimes people want to compartmentalize it and make it one aspect. But it really is the overarching thing that we live from.
Well, many people may not know, and I mentioned it in the book, that the word spiritual comes from the Latin word spiritus, which means, not surprisingly, the breath. Spiritual literally means of the breath.
Yeah. And how good for you, since that's what you do. That's hysterical to me. I love that. So let's talk about, in the book, Aging as a Spiritual Practice that you've written, Lewis, is you've delineated the stages of aging. So let's talk about that a little bit for our listeners. And then I want to talk about the list of what's good about aging, because I don't get it. And because I certainly am in alignment with what's not good right now.
Yes, well, of course, we each come from different places depending on where we are.
On that horizontal timeline, yeah?
Yeah, the stages of aging, I delineate 4. I created them, but I don't think they're my creation. Just to start with the 4, there is really getting for the first time that you're getting older. I call that lightning strikes, kapow, wow, I'm older.
And I love that as a phrase. It when I read this in your book, I was like, yep, I can remember that exact moment for me.
Yeah, a lot of people can. And the second stage is getting used to it, basically. That takes a while.
I'm wrestling with that, Lewis, I have to tell you.
And the third stage is adapting, making changes in your life, and being willing to be flexible. Flexibility is coming to be seen as extremely important to coping with aging. The more flexible you are, the more willing you are to make adjustments in your life, the better you're going to do. And I mean simple things like if you hurt your knee and you can't run anymore, you swim, that kind of thing. But you'd be amazed how many people say, I'm a runner, I'm not a swimmer, I'm not going to swim, and they just, are not flexible. The last stage is really acceptance or appreciation, where you accept fully, this is who I am, it's okay, I'm all right with it. So those are the 4 stages.
So with the lightning strike, let's just talk a little bit more about each one so that everybody can get that. So you're talking about it's that moment when, and now I've had a couple of them actually. As you
often have more than one.
Yeah, because I remember when I was when I turned 35, for some reason that was an aha moment, and I remember my son was almost a year old, and I was looking at myself in the mirror, and the reflection back to me was this woman, and I always saw myself looking younger all the time, and all of a sudden, it's not that I looked 35, but I saw the woman inside of me, and I went, oh, that's what I look like as a woman. It was a defining moment for me.
No more girl in there.
Right. There's no more youngster, no more, idiot teenager. Here's the woman. And it wasn't even, I mean, maybe it was in relationship to becoming a mother, but it was.
Yeah, you were a mom.
It was a defining moment.
Stage.
Yeah. And
it can be a small thing like that. It can be a bigger thing. For me, I was 35, and I recount this in the book, and I sat down with my doctor, and he said, "You have cancer."
Ouch.
And, that is a real earthquake. And obviously, I survived it. I'm a 30-year cancer survivor. So all of you out there who have cancer in your life somewhere, either yourself or a friend, take heart. There are such things as 30-year survivors. I'm one of them.
Yoo-hoo. I'm saying yahoo.
Yeah. So, and it can be. I have another earth shaker. I'm going from, you did the small one, I'm doing a couple.
I love it. You
I
go.
had a woman in my meditation group. I saw her in the grocery, and she came up and she looked utterly stricken. She was about 40. And she said, Lou, I just got a phone call. My mother just dropped dead. I feel so old.
Mm-hmm.
I feel so old. And she's, radiant, young-looking, beautiful. I mean, nothing had changed except lightning had struck. And I think it's just part of being human that lightning does strike. I think it's striking in age years on the whole later because we're living so much longer. Part of my writing the book is no generation of human beings has ever lived as long as we're going to live. The life expectancy in 1900 was 48.
Right.
So we're in a whole new world, and we have so much more time to, for good or for ill, experience this thing called aging. And it begins where it begins, where it's different for each person. But lightning does strike, and it does have that quality of suddenness in many cases. It can be gradual, but if you ask people, and I've done this so many times with audiences, you get story after story after story, and after hearing 8 or 10 of them, you realize it is lightning. It's a sudden aha, a thing that you get, and for most people, it's not all that great. It's kind of either, in my case, it was devastating.
Right.
In your case, it sounded kind of good, or there was a sense of
it made me
into yourself as
right.
a full-grown person and a person of maturity.
Right. It made me feel whole. I was
made you feel whole. Well,
whole, and yeah,
that would be an example of a good experience. But
right.
That's the beginning, as they like to say, of the rest of your life as a person growing older. And and in other cases, it's an injury, not necessarily a devastating one, but something that, like your doctor says, well, you have a touch of arthritis in your wrist, and you think, oh my God, arthritis.
Mm-hmm.
That's for old people.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're a runner. And you do hurt your knee, and the doctor cheerily comes in and says, well, no problem, just stop running, you'll be fine. And that's devastating news.
It's almost like it's taking something away from you. That's what I'm hearing, is that...
It's a loss.
Yeah.
It's a loss. I use the word loss a lot because loss doesn't sugar the cookie. It is a loss.
Well, and so I think in the book you say somewhere that, well, actually, I have a quote here, but you also say that aging is about dealing with loss. And so this quote that I have, you then said, is letting go of what is already slipping away is how we actually enjoy our lives. Letting go of what is already slipping away. Oh, my goodness, Louis. I mean, there's a lot of truth in that. And, oh, boy, I don't want to do that. I think that leads us into coming to terms with things.
Well, yes, it does. But let's just look at that quote for a minute, because I'm hearing you say it to me, and I'm thinking, oh, gee, did I write that? I must have. But the key in that quote is letting go.
Oh yeah.
In other words, the surrender, the continuous surrender, and not holding on. This is the flexibility to say, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to be able to run anymore. It's not good for me. So what's next? What can I do? That moment of picking yourself up from whatever loss it is and saying, okay, well, what can I do? That quality, that skill, that ability, that gift is the key to all healthy aging, in my view, and it is also the gate that opens the gift of aging, because aging is, in my view, partly loss and partly gifts. It's about 50-50. So you asked me earlier, gee, show me the gifts because I don't see them. We'll get to that when you feel we've talked enough about the stages. But yes, the second stage of aging after the lightning is, well, coming to terms with that. And part of coming to terms with that is letting go of youth.
So this is, I think, the stage I'm in personally right now. I know it is, Louis, and I have several people. So I'm in my mid-50s, and I have several people that I'm working with now that are at that crossroads and have traversed from 40s into 50s, going, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? Where am I going? And so many people that I'm working with, including myself, are having a hard time of letting go of what I thought it was going to be. What is it now? Where am I going? To move to the next stage of life. And so like for me personally, so when you talk about coming to terms as being flexible, I so want to encourage people that are listening to really develop that as your skill set, because otherwise, and for me, I have not been as flexible as I would like to be. And I'm talking about emotionally and mentally. And so I am going through a current process of divorce after 20 plus years. And it took a long time for me to get that part was complete and to let it go so that I can move on to the next step.
Well, sure. That's right. While you're talking, I'm remembering, I don't know if they still have these. Probably they're considered too dangerous. But when I was a kid, on the playgrounds, they had the rings that you hung from.
Oh, yeah.
I forget what they're called, but, and
Like in the jungle gym.
Yeah, and you would go from one ring to the next, but the key was not to let go of the last ring until you grabbed onto the next ring. So part of letting go, if you let go too soon, you fall.
Right.
And some kids were much better at it than I was. They could really go fast, and other kids just would hang there and start to cry.
That was me.
So, letting go is not just dropping to the ground. It's finding the next ring so that you can let go. And that's really the challenge. And sometimes I ask people just to make lists in my workshops. I say, okay, make a list of your recent losses.
Oh, wow, that's
and then
powerful.
On the right, make a list of what you still got. It's very easy to make the list of the losses because that's what's filling our mind.
Right.
Just got divorced. I mean, my heart goes out to you. I've had people who raise their hand in my groups and say, I just got divorced. That's all I can think about. And I'll tell you a wonderful story in a minute about a man who just been divorced and an epiphany that he had, because it's inspiring. But just make a footnote on a note on that. I'll come back to that. But on the right, I say, well, what do you still have? People have to pause and say, in the midst of loss, you feel like you don't have anything.
Yes.
You've lost it all. Well, okay, that's not quite enough. I know you've got something. You're here in the room. You're breathing. You're alive. You have a car that brought you here. You have friends. You have something. Make a list, and slowly people start to make the list, and it gets longer and longer. And as you focus on it, you realize, my gosh, I have so much.
That's a wonderful spiritual practice, because you just described how you get from one ring to the other.
Right. Well,
That's
let me
beautiful.
tell you that I can't wait to tell you this story.
Okay,
it's
tell
so
me.
Beautiful. This man looked so depressed. He came in, and we went around and introduced ourselves, and he said, it's not his real name, he said, my name is Jim. I just got divorced. I hate myself, or something very, he couldn't even look up. He was so depressed.
Yeah.
And we did a little exercise, one of my contemplative exercises called the thank you prayer. And it just consists of my saying the words thank you 3 or 4 times, and I just ask people to free associate the first thing that comes into their mind. All right, and people do that. And then I ask them what came into their mind. And when it got to him, he looked up, and he actually smiled, and he said, the taste of cinnamon.
Oh.
The taste of cinnamon.
Wow.
He was grateful for the taste of cinnamon. His deep self brought him that.
My
that
goodness.
was not a thought that came out of his conscious mind or his grief or his suffering. That came from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was just so beautiful. He had a big loss in his life, a kind of loss that drive people to drink or worse.
Mm-hmm.
But he still had it on it. If he were writing that list, and it was the list of what he still had, he still could taste cinnamon. And in a sense, his world of taste suddenly woke up. When people are depressed, they can't taste anything.
Right,
One
right.
of the symptoms. And he was starting to restore his gift of life through, and the gateway for him was this taste, which is so, the taste of cinnamon is very powerful and unique, and there's nothing else like it. It's like life itself.
Mm-hmm.
So for him, that was the next ring. He could, I don't know what he did with it after that, but at that moment, it was like his deeper self was reaching out for something that he could build his life around.
Right. On Living Your Inspired Life, we often talk about turning away from our past that's keeping us stuck, and then focusing on what our intention is for our future. And so that kind of what you're describing about this man, in essence, that recognition that he appreciates the taste of cinnamon, it gives him something to put his attention on and move towards.
Yes. And cinnamon, his marriage is gone. It died.
Right.
But cinnamon is alive.
Right.
It didn't die. So that's from death to life. There's kind of a rebirth in there.
Right.
And that could be a model for this, what I call the third stage of
Adaptation.
of life, which is adaptation. You move through your losses. And, in grief counseling, I'm not a professional grief counselor, but I know people who are. This is the kind of work they do, to move people through without shortcutting the grieving that you need to do. And really, every loss requires a certain amount of grieving, even a small loss. Like, I remember last month I was trying to clean the mantle. Probably shouldn't have tried, clumsy me, and I broke a vase that my wife really liked. I felt bad about it, and she started to cry. She was grieving for the vase.
Mm-hmm.
Small thing, but every loss has some grief. And you move through the grief, and you have to find what's there on the other side to move toward and reach out to. And I would say this process of moving from ring to ring is pretty much how it is as we get older. And you just have to develop more and more capability and facility, and also faith. There's a kind of faith that there is a next ring.
Yeah, well, life experience, as we've lived long enough, it shows us that there is another ring, as opposed to the 20-year-olds that don't even know where the rings are.
Well, that's right. You read these tragic stories, and I know a couple in our town of teenagers who, didn't get into the right college, or they had a devastating, they lost their boyfriend, and they're dead. They killed themselves.
Yeah, there's a lot of teen suicide going on.
And as an adult, you think, why couldn't they talk to me? Couldn't they just come and I could explain? But you're right. When you're young, that this is one of the gifts of being older. Frankly,
yeah,
it's one of the the subtitle of my book is A Contemplative Guide to Growing Older and Wiser, and that is a saying in the language, to grow older and wiser. And as you go through your whole life of experiencing loss and picking yourself up and finding the next thing, that's a skill that can carry you right through when we get to midlife and we have these major losses. If you can, and I think that, for me as a meditator, my meditation practice, which has a lot in common with prayer, it is a kind of silent prayer, is the resource that can hold these big losses and carry us through to the light, on the other side.
Right.
And that is really what people need to do to avoid becoming stuck midway through in the aging process, where they feel they just can't go on. And people do sometimes get to that point, particularly when they have an illness, or particularly a progressive illness or something like that. You feel like there's no hope.
Yeah.
And, there is always hope. A psychiatrist friend of mine, I asked him once in researching my book, what's your basic thing you tell people? I mean, narrow it down to one sentence that you use to help people. He said, in one sentence, I tell them, there's always something you can do.
Really?
And
does that work for people? Because when I'm in the pit of despair, if somebody tells me there's always something that I could do, I'm going to karate chop them or something.
Well, he doesn't tell them that. He asks them, what can you do?
I wouldn't even like that question, Louis, to be honest.
Well, but if you're in his office, you're paying for the hour.
I guess you got to come up with something, huh?
He would gently, work with you and say, no, I know you say there's nothing, but there must be something. I mean, he's very skillful at it. He's done it with me, when I was his client. And yes, he says, and yes, it does work. Not in every case. Every psychiatrist loses people.
Right.
But he says this really works with people who are depressed.
Well,
you have to be persistent, and you can do it with yourself.
And I'm teasing you too, Louis, because, when I was in that deep darkness right after I filed for divorce, people would come up to me that have been divorced, and say, oh, don't worry, it gets better. I'm like, really? Because it's not helping me now with you saying that.
No, I totally agree with that.
That's like when you're really sick and you're hooked up to tubes and somebody says, don't worry, you'll get out of here. Really?
Yeah. that's an example of what not to say to people.
Well, so now let's go to this list of I like growing old, because now you've really, I so appreciate this conversation with you, Liz, because it's really encouraging me to open up my perception to the enjoyment of aging. So in your book, I'm just going to read out some of this list that you have here, because some of it was like interesting. And also this is a list I noticed that comes from individuals, or must have, that have life experience. My 20-year-old would not. My 20-year-old thinks he's already doing some of this stuff. Okay, like the first one, the thing I like about growing old, doing what I want. And yet, as you get older, it is a lot of that. There's so much more freedom. Yes.
Well, I'm just reading about Justin Bieber getting arrested for speeding in his Lamborghini. He's doing what he wants, but there are consequences when you're his age.
Right.
What I mean by being 55 and doing what you want is in the context of 30 years of working really hard and raising a family and having to do a lot of things, not because you want to do them, but because you have to do them.
Right.
And coming to the point in your life where some of those things are lifted, the kids are out of the house, you're more financially secure, hopefully, fingers crossed, and that's not true for everybody. And the example specifically in the chapter, which I'm sure you're referring to, is a woman who'd been in the corporate rat race who quit and started her own business. And when I saw her in the restaurant, she was wearing a totally different style of clothes and a different hairdo and everything. And I said, "Boy, you look different." She said, "Absolutely. I'm wearing what I want to wear."
Yeah.
So that's what I meant by that.
No, and it makes tons of sense to me personally, because as we do progress in our life experience and get older, there are doors that open up to freedom that we didn't realize would be there when we were younger.
Right.
So and one of the other things you talk about is a chance to pursue my dreams. Now that's interesting as one of the good things about growing old, because wouldn't you think that's a 20-something-year-old idea? And yet, and this is the work that I'm doing with clients right now. Currently, is having many people have worked, jobs for 25, 30 plus years.
Well, I would add a little word in there.
What?
Postponed or deferred dreams.
Ah.
Yeah, a 20-year-old pursues their dreams, but they're just dreams. When you're 50 or 55 or 60, these are dreams that you've been nursing for your whole life.
And you finally feel, I know for me, I finally feel like I am wise enough and mature enough now to actually activate that dream and live it.
Right. So the horsepower of a dream you've nourished and thought about your whole life is enormous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can really levitate you to really a whole second life. And we're seeing that so much now in the older generations of people, not so much retiring, but, like the woman in my book, she just changed careers and did something that she wanted to do. But she had the experience of having been a mid-level corporate executive for 20 years.
Right. And it's interesting because another thing you have here, which I think ties into this woman creating a whole new career for herself, is this idea of giving back to the community, volunteering, that kind of a thing. And I would imagine with all the baby boomers now coming into this later half of life, I want to say I am envisioning this, is that all of us move more into that place where we can give back.
I heard that. That phrase is kind of in the underpinning of everybody of a certain age.
Yes, it is.
I heard it from almost everybody I interviewed. I want to give back in some way. I think it's some kind of primal life cycle energy that comes forward. It's deeper than just an idea. Everybody has it. I think it's what we're supposed to do as we get older in a community. That's our job. That's our role. That's our honored place to convey what we know, to be grandparents and show our adult children how to raise kids, I think there's always been that role of giving back in every human society, and so I think it just comes up as a very innate, natural thing. And to honor that in yourself and not think of it as a chore, but as a gift, is, I think, one of the good things about aging.
Right, and it's a natural progression. That's what I'm hearing you say. It's just part of the natural
thing.
progression.
It's good to know that, because that way you can invite it to come out of hiding and say, now's your time.
Mm-hmm. So I'm shifting gears just a little bit, Louis, because one of the things you said, and I forget what chapter now, but you talk. What I got out of is you equate happiness as part of the aging process. Happiness with reframing whatever the situation is or whatever it is your physical body is doing, but reframing all of that and then using generosity and gratitude to really be present with your life as it currently is and as it's moving forward. And so part of that giving back is part of that generosity. Yeah?
Well, yes, they've actually done research on this, although it's in almost all the world's religions, that when you are generous, when you give, it makes you happier.
Oh, boy, does it ever. And actually, I've had several people on the show where we've equated generosity with happiness. So it was really cool to see it as part of the spiritual practice of aging as well. And, and I think about, thinking about my parents, it made me think about, okay, so where are they really giving out? Where are they being generous? Because possibly if they did that more, their mental health certainly would improve. I don't know about the physical health, but maybe, yeah?
Well, your physical health is partly a matter of I'm sorry, that was a flip. Of luck and genes. Of luck and genes. But yes, generosity doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a small thing. And incidentally, when you're young, you think of happiness as getting stuff.
Oh, boy, yeah.
I'll be happy when I get what I want.
Right, when I have my relationship, when I have all that money that I see everybody else has. And
when you're older, if you're lucky, you figure out that actually it works the other way. And the scientific studies about happiness, there is a field of psychology now called happiness studies, and they have discerned by interviewing people and measuring them that, in fact, generosity, giving, and reframing is a psychological word. It basically used to be called the power of positive thinking. In other words, just seeing something in a positive light. Those three things are guaranteed, scientifically proven ways to be happier.
Yahoo! I love that you shared that with me, because that's what we talk about here on Living Your Inspired Life.
And they're probably in the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, and every other spiritual book.
The Vedas, yep. All the ancient wisdoms hold all of that. And it's so simple, isn't it? And we get ourselves so confused with the mishigash of living and distracted that it really just distills down to a very simple concept of being generous and being grateful. And both of those become a cyclical or circular activator.
Yes, and we do live in a very complicated, noisy, somewhat toxic world now. And my pet theory all along in writing the book, and I talk about it, is that we're adapted and evolved to live in small communities of 200 or 300 people where we know everybody.
Right.
And in those communities, it is pretty simple. You see what people need, and if you can give it to them, you do, and you feel better. And people thank you, and people bring you gifts, and you give them gifts. And happiness is something that's almost tangible. They've done studies of which countries in the world are the happiest.
Yeah.
And we're not in the top 15 or 20.
I believe it.
The countries that are more agrarian and rural, like Nigeria, for example, scores pretty high because a lot of the people live the old way people used to live. They don't have health care of any kind, but they have their community.
You know, and it's so interesting because as Americans, I was just reading something this morning about somebody who goes, oh, maybe it was in your book, somebody who, as part of their give back, they go to places like Nigeria to give their expertise away. And I'm like, how come they're not doing it here, you know, in South Central LA, or why aren't they doing it in America? But
that wasn't for my book, but that's a good question.
But it's interesting because
there's plenty of need here.
Right, and Americans think that the people that live in those smaller village agricultural environments got nothing when they have so much more.
Well, in a certain sense, I mean, they'd love to have a TV and a refrigerator just like anybody else, but that's not what they live or die on terms of happiness. They know that, and they probably look at us and say, "Gee, those folks are awfully busy and confused in their minds."
No, I'm sure.
Coming all the way over here.
I'm sure they do. So, you know, as you're sharing this about, you know, being involved in smaller communities is where you can really become aware and attuned to your happiness factor by being involved and giving and being generous and being grateful. So I just want to invite listeners to maybe find communities that are like-minded that you can get involved in. You know, like Louis, you lead meditation groups. I'm sure you have a community, right?
I do.
And that's got to be powerful for the people that participate, because they know that no matter what, they've got a group of people that see them and hear them and love them and give to them as they can, and they're open to give back.
Well, it's interesting. I actually have two communities in one, because we rent space at a congregational church.
Yeah.
And so once a week in the evening, we have our meditation group, which is small. But I'm also part of the bigger congregation. I attend their services. I'm close with the pastor, and they think of us as part of their extended family.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and they have gotten, like many of the local churches here where I live, into serving dinner for homeless men. Well, we participate in that as part of the larger service footprint of the church. So, I mean, one obvious word for a community of that size is a church.
Right.
And one of the knockout statistics I came up with in the book is a study from the year 2000, a very large study which determined that people who belong to a church or have a regular spiritual community live on average 7 years longer than those who do not.
Oh, wow. Yes, because they have their spiritual component.
Yeah, but they live 7 years longer. That means that the so-called spiritual part of the life is actually having an enormous effect on the physical being itself. In other words, there's a cellular, we're not just talking about something in your head.
Right.
There's a cellular sense of engagement and happiness that translates into more years.
Right.
A longer life. I couldn't believe that, and I went back, and in fact, my editor, before my book was published, said, "Are you sure about this?" and she made me, footnote it, and she went and looked herself, and she said, "Well, I guess it's that's the study." But it makes sense. It really does. It makes common sense.
So, Louis, one of the things that you talk about, and we're getting close to our end time, is that I have always loved the kindness prayer. That is part of Buddhism. And you've done a new riff on the kindness prayer in your book, Aging as a Spiritual Practice, and you invite people to speak this prayer. I worked with it this morning, and I've worked with the kindness prayer myself personally, but then I worked with this new rendition that you've created, and it's lovely. So I wanted to end today by saying that prayer.
Well, please go ahead. I don't have the book in front of me, and I wouldn't remember the wording as well as you if you have it there.
I have it here, so I'm going to say it for both of us and for everybody that's listening, and then we're going to close out the show. But so I've been talking to Louis Richmond, the author of Aging as a Spiritual Practice, and if you want to find out more about who Lewis is and what he's doing and the other books he's written, you can go to lewisrichmond.com. And I just want everybody to know, if you've missed anything or you want to replay this, you can go to livingyourinspiredlife.org and get caught up. And so here is the kindness prayer. And it goes like this. As I grow older, may I be kind to myself. As I grow older, may I accept joy and sorrow. As I grow older, may I be happy and at peace. As each of us grows older, may we be kind to ourselves. As each of us grows older, may we accept joy and sorrow. As each of us grows older, may we be happy and at peace. As all beings grow older, may they be kind to themselves. As all beings grow older, may they accept joy and sorrow. As all beings grow older, may they be happy and at peace. And so it is. Namaste.